Hello, this is John Majori with Majori on Bowie, and this is the Majori on Bowie YouTube channel, where I have a new interview every single week that always has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog, majorionbowie.com. And for a good blog, visit Pushing the Head of the Dame, which is authored and curated by my very special guest today, Chris O'Leary, a fan favorite to be sure. We're going to talk a little bit about Pushing Ahead of the Dame, but we're going to talk more about his two books, Rebel Rebel and Ashes to Ashes. Rebel Rebel covers the earlier part of David Bowie's career and has recently been revised and updated. Now, Chris is a very accomplished author whose writings have appeared in many publications and many other venues. But I think my audience principally knows him from his writing about Bowie. And so that's what we're really going to be focusing on today. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to be really excited to hear from you. I mentioned basically the titles, but let me ask you to describe in your own words what's your blog about, and more more to the point of this discussion, what are Rebel Rebel and Ashes to Ashes really about? What kind of books are they?
Yes, so the blog began 15 years ago, longer, I forget, 2009, summer of 2009. And it was meant to be just a song by song um, criticism, analysis thing of Bowie's music from the start, from Liza Jane, the first single. And it went on from there, and it's not, I would not say it's defunct now, but it's sort of in semi-hibernation because obviously there's no more songs really to write about, unless they put out new, old demos or something. But occasionally I will put up like an anniversary post. I think I'll probably do something on Outside this fall, for example. It's the 30th anniversary of the Outside record.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and the two books are kind of like the cleaned up and expanded and weightier incarnations of what I wrote on the blog. So Rebel Rebel is the new version starts with a song called "I Never Dreamed," which is the very first Bowie song, which was just known as a title until some fragments came out after his death. So that prompted me to start the second edition of Rebel Rebel with that song, and that goes through Station to Station, the Station to Station record. And then the second book, Ashes to Ashes, kicks off with Iggy Pop's The Idiot, which Bowie co-wrote and produced. And it's kind of like a Bowie record in many ways. And it
yeah.
ends obviously with Blackstar. And it's just, every single song, information about it, my thoughts about it, kind of very strange tangents sometimes for people that know, how the blog went. And that's pretty much it. So it's not quite a biography by any means, and it's more of a song by song atlas to his music.
Yeah, I have to say, I was going to say that I use them, the blog or the books, every
Mhm.
day in my own writing about Bowie as references, and but that's no longer accurate because I'm so familiar with them that I don't have to go back to them as much as I used to. So, but they're really valuable resources, and I would say also that it's not like a book, like you said, a biography that you have to read from the beginning to the end. If you want to read about a particular song or an album or something like that, you could go right into it. And
Yeah, it's meant to
yeah,
be sort of, you can jump in whenever you want to. That's sort of been the intention of it.
yeah. And one of the things, there are other books that are like that do song by song analyses, but the level of, the depth of your research is really, it's stunning. And can you talk a little bit about your process? And then I'm going to ask a little bit about the specific revisions in Rebel Rebel.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it was a gradual change in the process because if you look back on the blog, if you look back on the first year of entries, which was mostly the 60s
Yeah.
stuff, Space Oddity, it's pretty perfunctory. It was just because I didn't spend that much time on a song, and there was far less information out there. Basically, the gold standard, and I still think is the gold standard, is Nicholas Pegg's Complete David Bowie. I feel like that's sort of like the foundational text for Bowie. So, my goal was to be like, well, what else can I say that's not already in Nick Pegg's book?
Yeah.
And that led to taking a more musical analysis, like breaking down the songs, how do these songs work, and then trying to maybe layer in what possibly influenced the music. And Bowie is somebody who, thankfully, for a researcher and for a writer, wore his influences very openly on his sleeve, and to the point where he's will actually say in interviews, "Oh yeah, this was inspired by this and that," and sometimes he's lying about that. But
Yeah.
he's not like you have to really make extravagant interpretations for his music. He's very much someone. If you think he read a book, he probably did. That if you think he saw a movie, he probably did. Um, so you don't feel like you're going out too much on the wire when you're writing about him. So the research became trying to find, because I think, as with all rock music, histories are built on a lot of myths and a lot of 18 times told stories that kind of get distorted over the years. So just trying to track down, like, what actually did he say, and what do we actually know about this? And, Fame, for example, there's like 18 different versions, again, of how Fame was created. And sometimes they're very contradictory. John Lennon said one thing, and Carlos Alomar said one thing, and Bowie said
Yes.
another thing. And, it becomes a matter of getting all that stuff together and kind of pitting it against each other, and like, what is the common thing everyone agrees on, what is in doubt. And then there are new people that pop in. There was an interview some time ago, I think in the late 2010s, with Gene Millington, the musician Gene Millington, who was at the Fame recording sessions, and who played flute on it, and they didn't use the flute, it turned out. But then she said, and so did Ava Cherry, that Yoko Ono was there, which is something no one talked about. And so it's like, was Yoko Ono at the Fame session? So it feels like there's just all this new information that constantly is coming out that you got to kind of keep track of, and whether it's important or not. But it's just a matter of trying to weed out the most egregious myths and try to say as much as possible, this is what I think happened, but we don't know for sure. you know.
So you mentioned Fame, which is fascinating. I've
Yeah.
actually talked to some people that are on the song, and I asked them what exactly was John Lennon's contribution, and I got different answers.
Yeah.
What's your answer?
I mean, it's hard. I really feel sympathy for people like Alomar and Earl Slick, who are being asked, what did you do at work 50 years ago?
Yeah.
On this date, like, and it was probably at 4 in the morning, and everybody was maybe a little altered. So, I don't,
What do you
it's
mean, Chris?
it's like Roman historical documents or something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really a lot of, oh, I think this happened, but I can't tell you. John Lennon, I think, he was somebody who was kind of there to hang out. It was before, but now we have this information that Yoko Ono was there, which is interesting. It seemed to be kind of the end of what was called his last weekend period, where
yeah,
he's just at loose ends, and he's kind of getting drunk a lot and hanging out a lot with in studios. And like, if somebody was in town to record at Electric Lady or something, they'd call him up and he'd be like, "Yeah, I'll come down. Nothing else to do." So I think that was a part of it, and Bowie kind of lured him by doing Across the Universe, covering Across the Universe. And then I think he was hanging out and jamming, with Alomar and with Dennis Davis, whoever was there, and doing things like variations on Shirley and Company's Fame, 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 and Alomar had the foot stomping guitar riff already. So I have a feeling that Lennon probably helped craft the song. He probably, gave, because he was used to, kind of responding to what people were doing in the studio, and be like, "Oh, let's do this, let's do that." And I think, he might have come up with a good chunk of it. I think,
yeah.
central to it is Alomar's guitar riff, and I think a lot of the production stuff is Bowie kind of crafting the song. But I think, maybe, Lennon did a fair share of lyrical lines, or maybe, melodic hooks or what have you.
Do you think that his voice or guitar playing appears on what we hear when we listen to that song at all?
I think so. I think he's kind of doing the high-pitched fame. I think he's
Yeah,
in that, and I think, some of backwards piano, Bowie credited him with that little, opening, and he might be doing some of the guitar. So I think he
yeah,
is on it in some way.
yeah. Now it's fascinating how we're able to talk to people who were literally there, and as you said, we're asking them a tough question to remember what happened 50 years ago. But it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about that in the context. You said Roman history. It's biblical scholarship, or
Yeah.
you know any kind of historical account. How quickly the mind and the memory sort of distorts what happens.
Yes, and I think that's why I really came to value, interviews from the period, like
Yeah,
first generation
yeah,
interviews. Because I think
yeah,
what happens, and it really makes sense, is that people ask you over and over again about something, and as the years go on, you sort of are riffing on what you already said to another reporter, and I feel
yeah,
like Paul McCartney does that a lot. When you hear someone ask McCartney now about Sergeant Pepper, you can see that he is kind of repeating something he said 8,000 times already, to the point where he's probably not even remembering it. He's remembering what he said.
yeah,
It has the same phrases now, and he has, "Oh, we said, let's say pretend we're not the Beatles," and blah blah blah. So I think that's a problem. So I think when you're asking somebody in 2000 about something that happened in 1975, they're probably thinking, "Oh, what did I say in 1980 when they asked me?" And so I think, like, so when you find an interview with somebody like Harry Maslin or something for like a month after Station to Station is done, I think that's a pretty accurate interview. I feel like that is asking somebody about what they had to eat yesterday. Like they know it, like they
yeah,
actually are remembering precisely what happened. So I think I found those whenever there's an interview done within 6 months of a year of a recording, I find those to be the most trustworthy.
yeah. Now we're talking about fame, and that's
Mhm.
in Rebel Rebel. That's in this volume. But I don't think fame is the reason that you revised it. Why did you revise it?
Yeah, so talk, so what prompted the revisions? Is that should I
Yeah,
get into? Yeah. Well, it started out basically as a very technical thing. I mean, basically, the publisher of Ashes to Ashes, the second book, Repeater Books, bought Zero Books, which was the publisher of the first book. It's a long story. Basically, people who were at Zero left Zero, formed Repeater, and then they eventually bought Zero's catalog. So I thought well, that'd be a nice opportunity to get the books looking similar, which they do now, which I'm sort of pleased with that. They kind of look good on the shelf together at long last. They're the same size.
yeah,
Uh, but then I said, well, since we're doing this, I might as well update it. And it turns out, there by 2022, there had been a lot of new stuff. There had been a lot of demos that came out, and at the same time, I mentioned this in kind of the new introduction to the book. It really felt like after he died, anybody who knew him got a publishing deal. So it
yeah,
was like suddenly there's memoirs of John Hutchinson and memoirs of Woody Woodmansey and Phil Lancaster and Ava Cherry and Earl Slick. Like everybody got a book out, and so that's all this new perspective to absorb. Sometimes contradictory to what you thought. Um, so there was all of that, and then there was the information that came out with the museum exhibit, which I wasn't able to really talk about in the first book because I wrote it in 2013, 2014. So there was all of like
the David Bowie is exhibit.
yeah, David Bowie is like all his album notes and the Diamond Dogs movie and the script ideas and all of that stuff that came out in those exhibits all added necessary new perspectives. So I felt like it was worth really kind of you know changing the book, not substantially, but just adding a lot to it and correcting some things.
Yeah. So the new material that's come out isn't really new, right? So you
Yeah.
mentioned those, for instance, some of which are more than 50 years old.
Yes.
So as a historian, I don't know if you think of yourself as a historian, but you're producing works of history. I I understand how that material is interesting. They're being released commercially. Do you think that you think that's a good thing? Do you think that somebody who might just be getting into Bowie would do well by buying an album that contained a lot of demos and alternate takes of songs that might not be that familiar in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that was a reason Bowie was so resistant
Yeah,
for much of his life to putting out bonus tracks and archival releases. I think his idea was simply that what I put out was what I wanted people to hear.
yeah,
I don't know why you want to hear the second best take of Hang On to Yourself. I don't know what good that does anybody.
yeah,
And I understand that point of view. Yeah, as a researcher and someone, of course, I want to hear everything. I would love to hear. I would listen to every single studio take just out of curiosity. But
right,
I understand, the estate has competing needs to be, to get some more interesting archival stuff out there, but also to make it commercial. Like no one's gonna want to buy, except maybe someone like me, a 7 disc set with like every single Ziggy Stardust studio take and demo. I think that would be overkill
yeah,
and would not find, well, who knows, maybe it would find buyers, but um, and I do think that what I don't know what the plan is for the actual archive in London. Um, but I think it would be a nice thing if they digitized everything there. And then if you wanted to, you could come and put on a pair of headphones and listen to whatever you wanted to. And you didn't have to deal with, is this a marketable commodity kind of thing? Um, so yeah, in terms of like, would I recommend it to somebody getting into Bowie? Probably not.
yeah,
Um, because I don't think any of the new demos, though I think some are very interesting songs, and I kind of wish he had developed them more, like Mother Gray, I think and Jerusalem and songs like that. I don't think any of it is like a Bob Dylan situation where he quite literally left masterful music on the cutting room floor, like Blind Willie McTell and these songs that were better than things that were actually put out on
right,
his records. In Bowie's case, I don't really think that. I don't think I've never found, wow, this is an absolute masterpiece. I cannot believe he didn't put this out. The closest I would say is things like Velvet Goldmine, which did come out, after the record, but they were released. Um, so yeah, so I guess to a newcomer, it's hard to say. I feel like people absorb music in a sort of more random way than in the past now, I think via streaming. So maybe, one of his odd demos would appeal to them.
yeah.
Yeah, if you had to ask me, I'd say no, start with what he wanted you to hear.
There's a couple of box sets that I think are the type of thing we're talking about. One of them is Divine Symmetry, which
Yeah.
is the path to hunky dory, and I listened to it through all the discs, and it was curious, it was interesting, and certainly some of the songs are very well done. But I'm thinking to myself, now I've heard this disc, I'm not knocking down the door to listen to it again for pleasure, but
Yeah, I feel like, yeah. I mean, for me, I think I would play it because it's just fresher. So
yeah,
like I haven't heard these songs in the way that I've heard the originals God knows how many times. So probably it's more interesting. But yeah, in terms of like, I don't think I'm gonna sit down and listen to that disc of late 60s demos very often. I mean, they're
yeah.
interesting and there's some really fascinating stuff there, but I don't, it's not gonna replace Low or for me.
So,
So
so Buzz the Fuzz is not going to replace
yeah, yeah.
Nash
I mean,
Cat.
I'm glad it exists and I'm glad it's out there. Yeah.
So
So
let me ask you this: surely there are things you've heard about, like rumors that you've tried to chase down, or even pieces that you've heard as bootlegs that have not been either officially released or
mhm.
released in a format that you would really want to sit down and listen to it. What are some examples of that? Like, what are your holy grails?
Yeah. Well, there's the legendary concept record called Ernie Johnson, which he did demos of in 1968. And I think that could be like like a skeleton key to so much. Like who knows what's on, it's like, 10 tracks and it's his theater piece. And who knows what's on there and what he stole. or not stole, it was his own material, like what he reused.
Yeah.
And it could be just absolutely fascinating. And B, it really could be terrible. It could be incredibly embarrassing. And he probably might have put in his will, like, whatever you do, this can never be released, burn the tapes. So there's that. Um, the thing I'm looking forward to,
That's a
really,
good one
yeah,
because I
yeah,
don't think a lot of people even have know what you're talking about, right?
yeah, it's in the appendix of the book, and Nick Pegg has a lot of it, and I think it was Peter Doggett in Record Collector did hear it. At some point, it was auctioned in the '90s, so he was able to listen to the thing. And so most of the descriptions of what's on it is from him and Kevin Can. Um, it's never been bootlegged, and I have a feeling, you know, Bowie was okay with some things coming out, but I got a sense that he really wanted that thing just squashed. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
don't think we're ever going to hear it unless somebody robs the estate or something.
Yeah. So you mentioned a technique that he used where he recycled some of his own material.
Oh, yeah, constantly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of coincidentally, I I heard a word that I was not previously familiar with twice in the last week in different circumstances. Uh, I'm sure I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Palmacete. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which refers to the practice, like the medieval practice of monks erasing old parchments and then writing over them.
Yes.
And, and one of the contexts that I heard this word used was uh, having to do with Bowie. And like, what comes to mind immediately for me is the song that was never recorded in the studio, "I'm Tired of My Life," where he
Hmm.
borrowed some lyrics and used them in "Up the Hill Backward." Um, so is that what he did? Did he mine his own stuff for material?
Yes, very much. You can hear him. Uh, I think Scary Monsters, in retrospect, now feels very, very intentionally meant to be a goodbye to the '60s. In
Yeah,
that, so much of it is built on songs he never did anything with. Like, so the Astronauts pieces, which is the vocal trio he did with Ava Cherry and Jeff McCormick around the time of Diamond Dogs,
yeah,
didn't get off the ground. But some of the songs he wrote for them turn up in "Scream Like a Baby." That's the song "I Am a Laser."
yeah, yeah,
And and then in the new set, there's a song "King of the City," which has one of the melodies of "Ashes to Ashes." The song is already he has there. It's like, "I never done good things." Da, 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 da. That's in "King of the City." So you can, so it feels, Harry Monsters really feels like he's kind of going through the old diaries and be like, oh, okay, I can use, this is a good hook, and I'm going to use this chorus. And so "Tired of My Life," is in "It's No Game."
yeah. I said "Up the Hill
Yeah,
Backwards." I misspoke.
yeah. So yeah, I think that's how a lot of songwriters work. I mean, you can see like Neil Young does that. I'm sure Dylan does that. Um, and Bowie, think I guess that one reason I think he was very wary about putting out old stuff was that he didn't want, maybe didn't want people to know that this song he was a hit in 1983. He mostly wrote it in 1968 or something.
Yeah. So that said, he then did put out new versions of old stuff much
Hmm.
later when he did Toy.
Yes.
Well, what was he up to? Like, what accounts for the change in strategy?
Yeah, I that's a strange period for
Yeah,
him. It's one of the toughest periods to really get your head around because I'm not sure what he's doing. I think it's a reaction he had for almost a decade. He had what in retrospect was a true creative partnership with Reeves Gabrels. He was
yeah,
somebody who he really co-wrote so much in a way that he never did again. Not the case with Ronson or anything, or Alomar, even though they were integral figures. But like Gabrels was basically his co-writer for years, and then he and Reeves split. And I think he's a bit like, well, what can I get back to writing my own stuff again? Like, and I think he really, really tried through the '90s to still be relevant, to still try to appeal to young people to the point of, opening having Nine Inch Nails open for him and trying to appeal to their audience, even though he's almost 50. And then at the end of the decade, there's this sense of exhaustion. There's this sense of like, okay, enough. I'm in my 50s now and I'm married, I'm going to have a kid, and I'm not going to play the game anymore. And I think that leads to, you know, a nostalgic resurgence. So he plays Glastonbury again and he sings all the old hits again.
Yeah.
And that leads to Toy. He's like, well, let's just do the old songs, which were, not new song, but I feel like only the most devoted fans really knew stuff like I Dig Everything or
Right.
Can't Help Thinking About Me. It's like those songs were never part of the Bowie greatest hits packages because they were on different labels. So it wasn't like he was covering Starman again. He was covering
Right.
songs that many people had never heard before. So I think that was part of the challenge of it.
So one of the things that interests me is I think for many casual fans, the canon was sort of established by Rykodisc in the
Hmm.
early '90s, right when they were issuing the CDs. Really,
Sound and Vision is very much, yeah, Sound and Vision. But I would say before that,
uh-huh.
the Changes One Bowie compilation
Yes,
from 1976 was the start of like the story begins with Space Oddity, and it was a label thing. It was RCA only owned Space Oddity onward.
yeah,
It really feel like Bowie was very much part of that. Of like, okay, there is no history before Space Oddity. That's where everything begins.
yeah. I made an assumption that might be completely wrong, and Toy sort of challenged this. That Bowie really didn't want to draw a lot of attention to what he did before Space Oddity because he didn't like it.
Oh yeah, very much. He found it embarrassing, yeah,
Yeah,
and juvenilia, and
yeah,
he would go out of his. It's funny to find when in the early when he breaks through as Ziggy Stardust and he starts getting interviews, and then an enterprising reporter would be like, "Hey, I found this other record by you on Darum, and it's got songs like Uncle Arthur and Please, Mr. Gravedigger. What's that about?" And he really acted like they had found his teenage journal. He was like, "Oh, that was yeah, that was just done on spec, and don't pay no attention to that record." It's very funny. He really did feel like that was uh, essentially, as I said, juvenile work that was not worth considering in the same category as everything with Space Oddity. And
yeah,
so I do to bring it back to Toy, I do feel like with Toy, he's kind of making amends and being like, okay, I did write these songs and I think they have value.
yeah. You mentioned Uncle Arthur and Please Mr. Gravedigger, which in my mind are two of his worst songs, or two of the songs I enjoy least. And there's a lot of, you, I'm sure, encounter these people, Bowie fans, who are like, no, they're great, they're terrific. And with Uncle Arthur in particular, I say, okay, this is the very first song on the very first album of a
Yeah, it's the lead
career
off
that's
track.
going to span more than 50 years. That's what you want?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
I,
wild. It's a very weirdly sequenced record. Like, why not lead off with Love You Till Tuesday or Sell Me a Coat? At least, something with a hook to it.
yeah. As opposed to a song about a guy in his 30s who lives with his mother. So, yeah, anyway. But what came after it? Well, actually, I wanted to ask you this. So when you're revising Rebel Rebel and you're listening to some of these demos and some of these very early pieces of material, in retrospect, are you able to see like the seeds of genius that are not really flourishing on those particular recordings?
Yeah, I single out a couple of songs. Jerusalem, which is a song he wrote in 1969, around the time of like Wild Eyed Boy from Free Cloud, is very, very Dylan influenced. And you don't really hear that until then. And then obviously Dylan is in some of the Space Oddity songs, and he obviously there's Song for Bob Dylan, and reckoning with Dylan as sort of a creative foe, basically. And it's interesting to be like, okay, wow, he's really in his absorption process with this song. Like he's basically trying to write Gates of Eden or something.
Yeah.
So that's really revelatory of this is where he is here. And also hearing like if he had been allowed to make a second album by Darum in 1968, what would it have sounded like? And you get songs like Angel Angel Grubby Face and Goodbye Threepenny Joe. And you feel like, wow, this record probably would have been like the first record. You know, like he really maybe needed that break
Yeah.
to to move on to Space Oddity, to move on to songs like Letter to Hermione, which are on another level, I think, than
Right.
the previous stuff. And so, you know, if he had been allowed to put out another album of kind of twee, swinging London, late stage swinging London pop, I don't know if it would have done him any good. It might have hurt him.
Well, we might not be having this conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Um, yeah. Nonetheless, because he's not around producing new music, and I think I agree with you that there's probably not a whole lot of good stuff that doesn't exist in some format now already. Um, we are seeing demos released or early songs that are less familiar that haven't been around for a while because there's a continued interest in Bowie that that demands a new book every month or a new
yeah.
live album or something like that. Why do you think there that 10 years out after he's passed away, there continues to be this intense interest in David Bowie?
It's fun to compare where Bowie was, where he is now, you know, posthumously, and where he was in the '90s, because I
Yeah,
recall stories that um, David Buckley, one of his great biographer, I think struggled for years to find a publisher for Strange Fascination because nobody was like, oh, David Bowie, who wants to read about David Bowie? And you can see that um, there's a spate of stuff about the first wave of biographies come post Let's Dance. It's like there's a lot of books that come out in the mid 80s. And then there's a big kind of a gap until the 2000s with Buckley and with Nick Pegg's first edition. And I think that was in part because Bowie was considered just very not popular. People were just not into him. And
yeah,
that's changed. As you say, you know, somebody could put out a book of David Bowie's shoes, you know, what shoes Bowie wore over 50 years, and I think it would sell well.
that
And
would sell.
yeah, I just feel like his death really transformed him into this kind of figure of perpetual fascination for people. I'm not sure why. I mean, I think his, as with all celebrity deaths, it kind of brought home, oh, I really like this guy and I'm sad he's gone. But I think it also maybe for for the new generation brought him to light for the first time. And like, oh,
Yeah,
this guy is fascinating. And he's someone unlike other 60s, 70s people who was very much made for video and very much made you could see how like on TikTok you could get all sorts of stuff with clips from the Ashes to Ashes video and clips from Labyrinth. You feel like that, you know, he's very well suited for that kind of afterlife in a way
yeah.
that you know, the faces maybe weren't. So, you know, I think that's part of it too. I think people still are just absolutely fascinated by him.
You know, this is a thought that has occurred to me recently that the Sound and Vision tour might not have actually helped his reputation in the 90s
Hmm.
because it kind of labeled him as one who would have greatest hits. So,
Yeah,
you know, he's coming off of the Tin Machine was not a commercial blockbuster, and Never Let Me Down had been a critical disappointment. I think it has value, but then does the greatest hits, and it sort of calcifies him as a classic, right? So the next album he comes out with, I've asked this of others. Imagine if Black Tie White Noise was the immediate follow up to Let's Dance instead of Tonight. Would that album be thought of in a different way? And would his 80s output be thought of as in a different way?
I think so. I think people were expecting him, or especially his label, to. I think Nile Rodgers called Black Tie White Noise Star Wars 2. That was kind of the plan. Like, you know, Let's Dance 2. Let's another record with up tempo catchy hit singles. And Tonight is a much stranger record. Like basically he throws everybody a bone with Blue Jean, but the rest of the album is kind of meandering. It's strange covers. It's a lot of like let's give Iggy Pop money.
Yeah.
Uh, and it really kind of sandbags his momentum. Even though he keeps going, he still gets hits with Absolute Beginners. But yeah, it's a different tack, and then he kind of switches to trying to kind of do Ziggy Stardust in the '80s with "Never Let Me Down," and that doesn't quite work. So it's the '80s are really interesting in that "Let's Dance" itself is a bit of a surprise because it seemed to be at the start of the '80s that he was going in sort of a commercial avant-garde path. Scary Monsters was kind of art rock. Then he did the Bertolt Brecht piece, and he did a Oshima movie. And so like you easily could have seen him become like a Leonard Cohen, Scott Walker kind of figure and do
Yeah.
more, kind of rarefied music. So the choice to become a pop star for MTV was already a swerve.
So let me switch directions here for a moment. You with the revised version of Rebel Rebel and the blog being something that you update once in a while now because you've gone through all the songs, are you kind of Bowie'd out?
Yeah, I feel like with this revision, I've said pretty much everything I want to say. I reserve the right to to go
Yeah.
back on if in the years to come, if they keep doing archival sets. And I think the period I think could stand to be a lot of light shed on it is the Diamond Dogs era, which is
Yeah.
still a kind of a very cloudy, and you're not quite sure that kind of period after Ziggy Stardust, before Diamond Dogs, where he's doing 8,000 things at once. He's trying to do 1984. He's working with Amanda Lear. He has the Astronets thing. He's still kind of with Ronson, but not quite. It's a very confusing period. And so if a lot more light was shed on that, I think that would be interesting to write about. I think
Yeah.
Dogs is kind of like still the foggiest territory in that period.
Oh,
And
talk about, yeah, I'm sorry.
and then if they actually released One Day, the Man Who Fell to Earth soundtrack that he worked on, that could be really interesting because I think that is very much, I think, contains the seeds to the Low and Heroes records, the instrumentals.
Oh, believe it or not, I didn't realize that a complete soundtrack exists.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, but I think if there are finished
Yeah.
tracks, finished cues, whatever, they would be interesting to hear.
Yeah.
I think they'd be fascinating.
So if you took all of the work you've done on Bowie as research for a grand theory of David Bowie, what do you think that might look like?
Um, Gosh, I it's hard to say because perceptions of Bowie change with the years, and so there's a period where you could see when he breaks through in this with Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane in Britain. There's a group of journalists who have covered him for a long time, like Penny Valentine and Charles Shaar Murray, who are kind of like, wow, this guy is actually doing it. Because David Bowie was, I think, sort of like someone you got a promo copy every year, and you're like, whoa, this guy, he's got talent, but geez, this is not going to hit. So it was like someone who had been kicking around for a long time suddenly was now this bizarre superstar figure. So that was kind of like, well, who is this? This guy is not new. He's someone I've been writing about since 1967, and now he's being treated like like a a brand new pop star. And so from that, I feel like there was kind of a resentment about Bowie being fraudulent in a way, or being
Yeah.
sort of like someone who was too in on the game. He was too calculating, blah blah blah. Like no other pop artists weren't calculating.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think this slam of being inauthentic followed him for a long time, which I've always found kind of absurd. But the one thing I guess I would say is that if you look at his music as a whole, you see that there's so much commonality to everything he does, that he has some core themes that he develops in when he's 20, that he's still working with when he's near his death.
Yeah.
and that he is also somebody who kind of very pleasantly gets bored quickly. So you don't get the idea of like, for example, I love Neil Young, but the idea of like going through Neil Young's catalog song by song is so daunting because at some point you realize like, it's kind of he's in the same place a lot once you get out of like the 90s. Whereas with Bowie, he's always trying to do something else. And he might fail at it, or it might turn out to sound kind of like for example, The Next Day kind of sounds like reality, reality 10 years down the road,
Yeah.
a harder used reality. But you can see that he's really wants to be somebody who's moving, as he said in the song, moving on. He does not want to be. I think for him, the idea of becoming somebody like an Elton John or a Billy Joel who kind of would play Madison Square Garden and do the hits every year, play the sheds and have people sing along to his songs. I think that he kind of saw that as soul death in a way. And he kind of wanted to try to keep doing something more innovative, even at an age when rock stars are really supposed to be done, when they're really supposed to be, just playing to play the songs and if they put out an album, be kind and only play one song from it while I go to
Yeah.
the bathroom.
I so he, it, he I think he really sort of succeeded with Blackstar.
Yeah,
Wasn't on.
Blackstar really is it's the triumph of that.
Yeah, but it also, I think, the appreciation of Blackstar um, brought about a reevaluation of some of his other later works. And the example I think of is Heathen, which
Yes, good
well
example.
regarded, but I think, especially after he died, was sort of recognized as even better than we realized, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Leah Cardos, the writer, has done a really excellent job kind of framing that the late work, capital L,
Yeah.
the late work being Heathen to Blackstar, being
Yeah.
one kind of coherent oeuvre. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think, you can hive that off from, even though there's a lot of stuff he's drawing from and again bringing back, but there's definitely a lot of connections between the Heathen and Blackstar Records and, as I said, Reality and Next Day. They're kind of counterparts. They think
Yeah.
of them sort of like double brackets together, and so that makes for a really interesting thing to dig into.
Yeah. Well, Chris O'Leary, this has been terrific. There's many other conversations to be had.
Yeah,
I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I am going to invite you back.
yeah,
Let,
happy to whenever you want to. Yeah.
yeah, I asked if you were sort of Bowie'd out because I had an ulterior motive, which is every once in a while you're going to want to talk about David Bowie, and I've got a venue for you. So,
Well, I may be working on one last thing as sort of a contribution to a broader thing. So yeah, I'll have probably a little more to say.
great. Well, I'll certainly invite you back for that. I want to ask you a closing question that I ask everybody, and we've had exchanges before, and I think I've asked this to you before, but everybody changes their mind. What is your favorite Bowie song and album?
Um, I think I always say the same thing. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's true enough, which is Queen Bitch and Hunky Dory, from
Yeah,
which I took the name of the blog.
yeah,
The record that means most to me is Low.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Queen Bitch is one of my favorite songs, for sure. And I take from it something that might not have been intended, but how often do I think in my head, oh, I can do better than that?
Yeah, every line is quotable in that song.
Yeah.
It's masterful.
So, Chris, thank you very much. I look forward to getting the revised version of Rebel Rebel because the version that I have, it's like dog-eared and pages are ripped and everything
Yeah, yeah,
else.
yeah. That's another incentive to get it. Yeah, it's newer. Pages are crisp.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Things are- Yeah.